Let's get more information on the US. And joining me now is Peter Mathews, Professor of Political Science at Cyprus College and author of Dollar Democracy on Steroids. Thank you so much for your time, Professor. We've been seeing tens of thousands of protests here in Australia yesterday. They were mostly peaceful. Now, let's start with the protests taking place in Washington, D.C., because it is tipped to be the city's largest yet.
Yes, it is, and it's incredibly, significant because that's where the White House is, and the protests are at the White House. Most of the people there, and the White House is hunkered down and bunkered down, and having all kinds of guards around them. And the main question was, can the U.S. military be used in this situation? And there is an act called the Pause Comitatus Act of 1870 something or the other, and at that time in the 1870s, that was passed in order to prevent the military from being used in domestic issues or domestic suppression, especially of free speech. It's very controversial right now because the good thing is though the military has pulled back a bit. They've decided to not have the National Guard there with arms. So it's important that the people are noticing that the rule of law, has to be followed in this very critical time in this context.
We're just seeing some live shots now, Professor, in Washington at the protest, as we mentioned, the largest yet. We've also seen a recent NPR PBS Hour Marist poll which shows 2/3 of Americans believe that US President Donald Trump has increased racial tensions in the US, as we certainly witnessed the flare-up in the protests over police brutality and racism. What are your thoughts on those statistics?
I think they're absolutely correct, and 2/3 of the people are right in assessing that because the president has not been one to try to unite people and to put calm on the ruffled waters, but instead he's actually stimulated much of the division with his statements, his comments, his tweets, and when he encouraged police several months ago to not be too gentle on people that they arrest, on suspects, not be too gentle. Well, now they're not being very gentle; they're actually killing them in many cases. And the case of George Floyd was not the first. There were many others. Breonna Taylor, for example, and so many people before that, African Americans who were horribly treated by police. And the president has some hand in that, unfortunately. He needs to tone things down, bring people together, and use the rhetoric which conveys a sense of unity and purpose in bringing more justice. As the crowd was chanting, no justice, no peace. And there is certainly some truth in that. If there's fairness and justice in the legal system and the society, there'll be a lot more peaceful and harmonious society. And with a huge history of race relations going back 300 or 400 years, with African Americans and whites, it's just something that has to be really dealt with immediately.
And the Reverend Al Sharpton announced on Thursday that he is organising a march on Washington, late August, to mark the 57th anniversary of the historic demonstration for civil rights as protests over the death of George Floyd sweep the nation. They had, I believe, around 200,000 marching at that event 57 years ago. How do you think it will be in the couple of months' time across Washington late August?
50 years ago, it was about 250,000 actually at the march, where Dr. King made an incredible speech. And I think coming up in August, there's going to be a huge, massive turnout on this. As you can see, even the COVID pandemic hasn't been able to stop people. And many of them are observing social distancing, but even in case when sometimes they're not, they're there in massive numbers because of the heartfelt anguish and fight for social justice. And I think you'll have to see something in August. You will not be quite amazed at what's going to be there in August. I'm sure it's going to be very overwhelming in terms of making a real statement with many, many people showing up there.
Yes, you make some great points there. The heartfelt anguish included. The World Health Organization, Professor, but has changed its advice on face masks, saying people should be wearing them in public where social distancing is not possible to stop the spread of COVID-19. We are seeing a lot of people adhering to those rules. How concerned are people about a possible spike in COVID-19 cases due to these demonstrations? As you mentioned, a lot of people are just so upset over what's happening, but some people are not adhering to these measures.
Right, and it's very important to take the note of those measures and to observe them as strictly as possible, even when you're out there protesting. They should maintain the social distance as much as possible and then always wear the mask, always, because the mask does in fact reduce the amount of germs that can come out of the mouth when someone's speaking or yelling at a protest or demonstrating with their voice. That's a lot of saliva can come out, the droplets can come out, and there's also aerosol spray which can come out, which other people can actually absorb unless you have a mask on. And the mask is not 100% secure, but it's at least in some cases 95% secure. It needs to be used by everyone. I even use when I go out for a walk around my house. In case neighbors see me and want to talk, I make sure my mask is on. Very important when you're outdoors to wear that.
It certainly is. And finally, it is official. Joe Biden has now clinched the Democratic Party nomination. Do you think he is strong enough to win the 2020 election against Donald Trump?
I think in the net balance, he is strong enough, and the numbers are indicating it in the polls. But you have to always be careful because the American system is based not on a direct election by the people, but by the Electoral College, which can allow the one presidential candidate to win more votes than the other and still lose the election, as happened last time. And so, in those swing states or border states, which can go either way, Biden has to crank up his game and pump it up more by getting out there as much as possible and connecting with the people, heartfelt, and also the former Bernie Sanders voters have to be brought aboard by candidate Biden, or he could lose in those states and lose the entire election once again, as Hillary Clinton did last time.
As always, a pleasure to have you on board here on Weekend Edition. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. Professor Peter Mathews, political science at Cypriot College and author of Dollar Democracy on Steroids. Thank you so much. You take care.
You too. Thank you.
Great to have